What up? What up? What up? What up? What up? What up? No, we can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mike.
That sounded like a great alarm setting, though. I wish I had that on my phone, so I could
Little
wake up
beatbox
like
alarm. Yeah.
You've always been an excellent beatboxer.
Why, thank you. I spent a lot of time alone as a child. Welcome to Call and Response. Hi, I'm Baron Vaughn. That's Open Mike Eagle.
That is me, in fact.
That's what I've heard about you. A lot of people say, you know who that guy is? He's Open Mike Eagle.
I'm glad to get that part right.
What are the parts that they usually get wrong?
Just about everything else.
Well, you know what I'm interested to know what? To know what? You know
To
what?
know what? To know
You
what?
know what I'm interested to know what?
What are you interested to know what? About what? What?
You know, the fact that I tripped on my words is a perfect segue into people like yourself who know how to rap.
Rap?
And know how to handle language, because there was a little bit of hip hop news that sort of dropped last night. J. Cole released.
Oh my gosh, are we about to talk about that, Baron?
Yes, I know. You said you didn't really want to talk about it, but I saw your tweet and I was like, well, now I got to talk to Mike about it.
I
So,
wrote a couple of tweets now. The last one kind of gives a sense of where I'm at right now.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, where are you at right now? What was
Well,
the first tweet that you
How
wrote?
about this? Before that, why don't you set the scene for the people on what incidences occurred, and then I'll tell you what my responses have been.
Okay, so J. Cole dropped an album. Was that a full album
I
last
believe
night?
it was just a song.
Just a song, one song, Snow on the Bluff, I believe is what it was called. And there were some lyrics that a lot of people thought had to do with another very brilliant rapper, No Name. And people have been talking about it, you know, on the twits. Many people. And I saw that you were talking about it, so I was really curious as to what your take, as a person who's in that profession, what your take is.
Well, you know, and me being in the profession is kind of why it's a difficult thing for me to talk about. You know, one of the things that we speak about on this program, or we're starting to, is that I can lean quite cynical at times, and when it comes to my profession,
No, get out of here.
yeah, man, when it comes to my profession, that's probably the area of life where I am the most cynical. So I have to preface any of these views with the fact that my cynicism informs them all, especially now.
Okay. Cynicism informs them all. I like it.
So my first tweet was just in complete disbelief that people were saying that J. Cole had sent bars at No Name in a
Mm-hmm.
song, because to me, that seemed just so absurdly unintelligent.
Why is that?
Well, it's for a lot of reasons. One is No Name is really dope. Like she's really
She
dope.
is.
Like
She's
she's
very good.
fire, and like she's got the kind of style that you might think, you might call it unassuming,
Mm.
but she'll
That's part of her
she'll
skill set, though. Like she catches you off guard with the lyricism.
exactly. But then the things that she says are quite pointed, and it's like, she could easily cause somebody going at her to trip over themselves and be made to look very, very foolish. So that's one level. Um, on another level, it's the moment that we're in
Mm-hmm.
politically, where
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that he seemed to be aiming at her were about like policing her tone and how she comes across about issues. Which seems also not smart, in this sort of environment to critique her in such a fashion. Just seems that it would that he would know that whatever he's actually trying to say is going to possibly be drowned out by just the audacity of him approaching her in that way.
Mm.
And then see, the third level is where I get real cynical.
Ooh, that's my favorite level.
Oh
We're in the
gosh.
we're in the third level of Mike's Inferno.
Okay,
This
so
is
here
the
we
one that's
go.
the cynicism.
Now I'm talking to the world now, and
Yeah.
and I'm gonna be letting y'all in on the kind of dark thoughts I have when I sit alone and think about my
You
place in the
better
world.
listen, world.
Yeah. So J. Cole
Yeah.
is in a very unique position in terms of rap music.
Okay.
He is positioned as kind of the alternative in terms of the highest selling rappers. Like you have the mainstream rap image, and
Mm-hmm.
you have J. Cole positioned as like the safe, thoughtful alternative, right?
Alt rap image.
Yeah, like and it's supposed to be, it's positioned contrary to like the dangerous hood street image that a lot of other mainstream rappers portray.
Okay. Okay.
From my vantage point, that is due to him being surrounded by some very, very smart people,
Okay.
who have done things and made moves to make sure that he is positioned that way. Um, like I said, in contrast to the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what goes with that
Okay.
is making sure that the people who pay attention to him aren't aware of other very intelligent and thoughtful rappers. Like that's part of how you maintain that position, is that you
Interesting.
don't shine a light on things that are done in any way similarly. And so to me, that's the other unintelligent part of this, is like for him to, I think thus far, to protect that position, he has been very intentional on not shining lights on things, on rappers coming up that he isn't tied into business wise. So somebody around him had to know that him directing this sort of energy at her was going to do nothing except blow her up.
Interesting.
And so then my cynic brain gets extra active and wonders if this is all some weird theater. And then they end up going on tour together next year, which is great,
Which
is
actually is
great.
not a bad idea at all. No.
I as a cynic,
Yes.
I don't like that sort of gamesmanship if that is what's at play.
Okay, so J. Cole and No Name hitting the road, brought to you by Lupe Fiasco.
Something.
That's fascinating. That's very fascinating. Yeah, I saw somebody say that they could have just talked about this in DMs and,
And-
left the
and-
rest of it out.
Right, and
Left
I
all of
guess
us out of it.
Who's to say they didn't? Is as I guess what the cynic in me would say.
Where's that cynic come from, Mike?
It's from my experiences in the industry, and a lot of it is kind of colored, if I'm to be very honest, by the fact that I feel as if I represent a sort of rapper in that same space that doesn't receive attention in the same way, and that could be for a myriad of reasons. But part of the cynic in me wants to frame some of that reasoning as being systemic.
Fascinating. I mean, I relate to a certain extent being a comedian, you know, and that there being an image for what becomes the popular comedian.
Right.
But that can be very tricky. Obviously, there was some news about a very popular comedian yesterday,
Correct.
being inappropriate. And all I'm saying, Netflix, is I'm here. I'm ready, and I've already been on 18 of your shows. Okay?
Barron is the safe alternative, y'all.
The safe alternative. Woof. Safe and alternative do not make me feel good about,
That,
you know, those are, but labels can be very tricky. But that's actually going to help us get into what we're talking about today.
Absolutely.
We're talking about trauma, intergenerational trauma, all the ways that these things sort of rear their ugly heads, you know. And I feel like right now in the culture that there's a discussion happening that is, you know, it's different than I remember it being, because growing up for myself, that's not what you talked about. You didn't talk about trauma. You didn't talk about mental health. You didn't talk about depression. You know, it was like, you better pray on it, basically, you know, walk it off kind of a thing. I used to have a joke where I said, I'm going to therapy and I love it. And I love, that's because I love doing things I was told Black people do not do. So going to therapy, love it. Eating blueberries, delicious. Skiing, don't think so. I cannot trust a sport that wants me to be at the top of the mountain to begin, because getting there is its own sport. I'll be down here safe and warm in the jacuzzi.
That's good. You got to have a line, man. You got to have a boundary somewhere.
Exactly. But now there's this discussion is even it's just so it's blown up, I guess I could say. There's a proliferation of these topics going on in the culture right now. And I actually saw this Instagram post that I wanted to read at you. Signs of intergenerational trauma. Okay, this is going to be slightly triggering. Okay, trigger please for a lot of people out there. Okay, history of poor parent-child relationships and emotional attachment within the family. Check. History of untreated substance abuse or mental illness within the family. Double check. History of poor boundaries within the family.
Yeah.
Negative repeated patterns of behavior within the family, selling drugs, dropping out of school, and beliefs about parenting. Having the content mindset. Having the content mindset of it is what it is. Always in fight or flight survival mode. History of one-parent households. Complicated personality traits or personality disorders within the family. History of family secrets. History of poor romantic relationships within the family. So this was posted on Twitter by somebody called Sent from Devon, Devyn, who calls herself a millennial therapist and yoga teacher. That's who posted that. And that kind of hit me because I feel like literally every single thing on that list is in my life. Can
I interject something real fast?
Please interject.
How emblematic is it of our current condition that we can't even see the word content right now? It immediately jumps to content. We can't even see it.
Yeah, well, I think it was content, wasn't it? Is that a content mindset?
I think you're absolutely right, okay. But I would have done the same thing, and I would have said content, because that's the word I'm used to seeing, or the way that I'm used to seeing it.
Because like, what kind of content? That's always what we're talking about. But you know, that's to say that obviously those things apply to me. I don't know if they apply to you. They might apply to some of the guests that we have today, and we'll ask them about that. But an example of my intergenerational trauma, I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was like, hey, you know someone that's in Minneapolis that's kind of like in the middle of all that stuff that's going there. And I'm like, really? Who? And she's like, your uncle. That's my mom's brother, who I met once when I was probably 7, at the same time that I met my grandfather, for the only time, right? That's the only time I ever met that man. My grandfather and my grandmother were separated my entire life. I went to Des Moines once to meet my grandfather, never saw him again. I did a stand-up show in Des Moines a couple years ago. In the middle of the show, I was like, hey, is my grandpa here? Because I was like, maybe he saw my face and my name and was like, that's my face and my name. And he was not there. And when I called my mom, I was like, hey, is my grandpa still here in like West Des Moines? And she was like, oh, he died last month. And that's how I found out about that. How my mom met her brother. They were teenagers, okay? He came over to play with her stepbrother because they lived in the same neighborhood. They took one look at each other and went, who's your dad? And that's how they met. And a couple years ago, I, for the first time, met my biological sister, who is about the same age as me. So that's just a little tangled web that my family has woven. And I feel like these are the webs that, inform us. You can say that, there's even arguments to say that it goes into our DNA and stuff like that. And so our guests today are going to talk about how they deal with that, but also how they've educated themselves about that, or how they have never been educated about that, which I think is also a problem. And I think that's what we can do. You want to bring up our first guest, Mike? What you think?
I think we should go ahead and do that. I'm excited to speak to Miss Chanelle Benz, who I understand, aside from being a brilliant author, is also a friend of yours, correct?
Yes. One of my closest friends in the world. We went to college together, and we've kept in touch that entire time. We still keep in touch. Obviously, both of us are parents and stuff like that, so it gets harder, as you know, to talk on the phone when you got a 3-year-old trying to take the phone out of your hand and throw it at your head at the exact same time. So I would like to introduce my good friend, author and professor. She has a book called The Gone Dead. Please welcome to Call and Response, Chanelle Benz.
Hello, Chanelle.
Hello, Mike. Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. Very excited to meet you.
I like how very formal that was.
It was.
Greetings.
I am British,
That's right. And actually, that's a good place to start, right?
Oh.
So how about you tell us, Chanelle, and I'm going to ask this in the way that you've probably been asked this question a lot growing up. Where you from?
Oh, shit.
Yep. Coded ass question.
That's the best answer, too.
The answer depends on who I'm talking to, but since I'm talking to you, I was born in London. I moved to America when I was just before I was 7. And my mother is English and Irish. She's white. And my father is Antiguan.
Mm-hmm. And so did you move with your mother and your father together to the United States?
No.
No? What does that mean?
I know. So my father lost custody of me when I was about 5, 4, I can't remember. And my mom married a white American, and we moved to here. And then eventually we had a couple, my brother and sister, white children. And I just like Barron, I just talked to my father a couple years ago for the first time since I talked to him once when I was 19, but I haven't seen him since I was 6.
Wow. And so what was that like for you to have dark skin and grow up in a very white family with a British mom? Like, what kind of things does that make you look at the world like? What? That's not what I meant to say. How does that inform the way you look at the world? Okay, let me just rewind that. So growing up with black skin, but in a white family with a British mother, that must inform the way that you look at the world, right?
Yes. So, I think it was lonely. I think, and you and I have talked about this, but when I was in England, not to say England doesn't have racism, it does. It just shifted out. They stopped slavery on the land of England, the United Kingdom, I think in like 1805. I'm probably off by a couple of years.
Yeah, there was that movie with Mr. Fantastic in it, Dr. Fantastic in it.
They still had it in the Caribbean, so they just outsourced it. And that's how the British Empire became the British Empire, because that's where they got their wealth. And so anyway, so racism exists there, no doubt, exists everywhere, but it's different. And so when I came to America, within like a few weeks, I had a step cousin, and he said, we were standing out in the front yard, and he said to me, like in a whisper, he said, "My cousin Jenny thinks that your dad is black." And he said it to me in this way that like black was this bad thing. It was shameful. And I didn't know. I didn't know what black was. So I had to go and ask my mom, I thought of him and I was like, well, he's this brownish color. Is that what black is? And so I asked her, and she was just like, who said that? And I told her about it. But I think from that moment, I just knew, and it was communicated to me, that black was this thing that was undesirable, that you didn't want to be. And that somehow it was not like normal. You know what I mean? Because that's what white supremacy does. White masquerades as the default normal, right? Especially in the 90s and the 80s. So, you know, and that manifests in all kinds of ways, but part of it is like, you know, and a lot of it was like, you know, entering spaces with my mother who was really young, but from that beginning, like people were always like, who is that? And I'm like, that's my mom. Or why are you with those people? Or you'd walk into a restaurant and maybe I'd be behind them and they'd already be sitting and they'd be like, can I help you? Like, you know, like you couldn't possibly be with them.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think it was, you know, extremely isolating, but also like when you're a kid, you don't necessarily, you know that something is wrong. You know that there's injustice happening. You know you're being treated differently, but you don't have the language. And, you know, people I wasn't hearing any conversations about it. I wasn't like seeing it on TV. I just knew what I was not acceptable somehow.
Oof. And when do you think that you started to think about those things differently? I mean, I would assume that, you know, you're so young, you don't know how to understand that. So it just gets internalized. And then at some point you started to do some kind of work or something happened to you where it kind of opened up that door and allowed you to examine these things in a new way. So can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was in a lot of white spaces, but pretty early on, no matter where I was, I always had another Black friend. Usually that other friend was somebody who was a little bit of an outsider themselves. Like they would be black checked, like their authenticity might be questioned as well. Right. And I was always had that person. And in 7th grade, one of my best friends, her name is Carmen, and her father was the minister of music at Mount Zion in DC. And I always remember when she took me one day. And, you know, there are all these like Black ladies up there like testifying and I'm in the middle of it and it's music. And I'm just like, I was like, I'm in it. You know, I didn't have the words for it, but it's like, I'm in it. I'm part of the Black community in this moment. And they just accepted me, you know, and it was just like, that's what I'd been hungry for, you know. It's like someone's underfed you and you just didn't realize like what full felt like.
Oh, wow. So it's a great line. You must be a writer. Mike, did you have anything we've talked about?
Sure. It sounds like in your experience, it being particularly isolating, that means you likely had a lot of time alone. And that could be either socially alone or just psychologically alone. But I'm wondering if you can remember what ideas you started to become fascinated by when you had that time alone to think, like what if you could remember like the earliest kind of ideas and things that you would be fascinated by when you had that time to be by yourself and process.
Yeah. So I think part of it is I got really fascinated with historical stories, heroic stories, comic books, all that kind of stuff, but also like trying to find ways to insert myself. Like one of the first things I remember seeing, and this is really dumb, but I saw Young Guns 2. Never seen Young Guns 1, just Young Guns 2.
And you don't need to see Young Guns 1.
Probably not. But I was kind of like, how could I be in this history? Well, I could be, you know, Billy the Kid's bastard sister, you know what I mean? Like his mom and some, you know, Black cowboy got together or something. But I just would find ways to like insert myself in different histories because I wasn't seeing myself. But I think deep down, I knew like those stories are there. Those other voices are there. Those omitted and silenced and forgotten voices are there. And so I was always looking at that. And also I think I was obsessed with injustice. You know, like, you know, that early feeling you get when you're in a movie theater and it's like some kind of dumb heroic movie and like the cape is fluttering and the sun is rising and you get that like tight feeling in your heart. And I always felt like, yeah, I too would be fighting for justice. And so I think pretty early on, I was surprised when I would see that people are not fighting for justice in their own lives. Like, how aren't you standing up for like the underdog or the oppressed?
Do you have ideas of like for reasons that could be?
Whether or not?
Yeah. Like what gets in people's way?
It's uncomfortable. It's not easy. And you have to sort of examine yourself and your roles, and you have to educate yourself. And Can I curse in here? I don't know.
Yes, of
Curse,
course.
curse often.
Curse as much as you
Have to
fucking want.
read a book. Like that's what's been going through my mind lately when I talk to certain white people. I'm like, can you just go and talk to me later after you fucking read a book? I'm tired. I'm tired. Like I don't have the energy for this.
Now, can I interrupt real quick? There was this tweet that you wanted to mention. It's from Clint Smith, and it reads, I've said this before, but for all the people who believe you definitely would have been abolitionists in the era of slavery, who you are today is who you would have been then. You don't need to imagine scenarios of living in the 19th century. There's work to do here and now. And that sort of speaks to some of the things you were talking about, injustice. It's also like the intersection of injustice and history, because people do like to do that kind of historical revisionism, right? Oh, well, if I was there, I would be a blah, blah, blah. But of course, in this moment, nothing is really happening. So what is it about that tweet that spoke to you?
I just think that like he put into, he's so amazing. He put into words exactly what I think I've been feeling for a long time, my whole life. Just watching people think that racism is about being nice and being mean. Well, I can't be racist because I'm a nice person, or I'm empathetic and I do feel for you. It's like, bitch, learn about some systems. Like learn your history. Not.
That's the title of this episode now. Is bitch learn about some systems.
Bitch learn about some systems. I'm with it. I'm with it.
You can't separate what's going on about from history. You can't just make it about people's feelings getting hurt. It's not about that, and that's why it's so exhausting sometimes to have conversations with people. But I think that's part of my fascination with history. And for me, because I came from these white spaces, a lot about journeying toward my Blackness was learning about history. And, learning something about Reconstruction, which in my high school education was just like Reconstruction, it happened. And then it was like a sentence and then we're moving on, and
absolutely. Reconstruction is one of the most, I'm learning, of course, a very important, moment in United States history in which a lot of the things that we fought against in the civil rights movement in the 60s were established during Reconstruction. It wasn't just like, those things just magically happened. It was always intentional. I have a big fat book called Black Reconstruction by Du Bois that I will read one day. But you were talking about, I want to hear a little bit more about history, especially because you've lived in New Orleans, you've lived in Mississippi, you're currently in Memphis, and also you write. You do a lot of research for all the different stories and novels that you write. So I'm curious as to what kind of history you learned about that you try to examine in your stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, my novel The Ganda, it was a lot about, I was living in Mississippi. I was living in Southeast Mississippi, which is more closer culturally to New Orleans. And I was just driving a lot at the time because I had nothing to do. There's nothing to do there. And I started going to all these little Mississippi towns, and I started going to the Mississippi Delta. And while I was in the Delta, I started doing research. And one of the first things I found out about were these civil rights era cold cases. And I found these just lists of names of people that had been murdered during the civil rights era from racially motivated violence. And a lot of these stories started to really strike me. And really, there's only been a couple cases in Mississippi since Emmett Till that have ever come to any sort of justice. And one of those cases that didn't come to justice was this guy named Clifford Walker. And he worked at either like a paper mill plant or a tire company. And those were kind of like the big sort of factories there. And it was also a hub for Klan activity as well. But Black and white men worked there. And I think he was in an interracial carpool. And that was the thing that he did that was too much. He needed to be put in his place. And so there started to be rumors about him being with white women, which is how, it starts. Same thing with Emmett Till. So he was warned, like, don't drive down this road. And one day he went home on a road called Poor Road, and his men surrounded his car and they shot it out, and they shot him. And then his kids were up on the hill, and one of them came running down and saw the police and saw him. And I watched a little documentary with his kids who were walking and trying to figure out what exactly happened and who exactly did it, even though they kind of know who the perpetrators were. Like, you know, the police are involved, that kind of stuff. Because the police at the time were members of the Klan. And the thing that they said that really struck me is they're walking around the streets of Natchez, Mississippi, and they know that people they're passing know who did it. Or are the people that did it. They're passing the perpetrators. They're passing people that have knowledge. And there are even Black people in the community who might have been, like maybe one was probably an informant, but other people who know something. And they even interview a woman who's like in her 80s or 90s. She's still scared to say something. So I got really interested when I'm hearing them talk and the pain in their voice and the injustice of it, but also that it's this thing that happened a long time ago, but they're just carrying it. And at the same time, they're told, hey, that's in the past. Let it go. You know?
A very familiar refrain these days.
Yeah. And it's, you know, as if we don't pass down things through our DNA, as if that experience that happened in our childhood doesn't mark us and shape us forever. And I also thought about, well, what about the perpetrators' kids? Like, what about these, you know, deputies, their kids? And so I started looking at different cases and like trying to trace relatives. And I came across this obituary from 2000 from this sheriff, and who I had traced was involved in the Klan and involved in these murders. And it's just like, you know, so-and-so was a great civic servant. He served in this role and was county clerk and was sheriff for 30 years and blah, you know, on and on and on. And it's just like, he gets to have that story. His kids and grandkids get to have that story. He gets to thrive and enjoy that. And here's this other family that are not able to recover from this wound, you know, and let alone all the other things it means to be Black in America. But they have this open wound. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No worries. We definitely want to tug at the string of intergenerational trauma more, but before we go to that, there was something I wanted to ask you about your work specifically. A lot of it seems to not only be about people in places with history, but specifically with traumatic history. And I'm wondering, in addition to how trauma affects people, I was wondering if you had any insight or thoughts about how trauma affects places.
You know, I don't, not scholarly, but just as a person, when I went to the Delta, the feeling of what happened in that place is palpable. The land remembers. And there's something about the idea that the people that worked this land, their blood is in the land. And the patterns of them working and walking and living in tenant shacks and sharecropping, like those patterns are like haunt this space. And things, unlike other spaces that we might not realize, like this building or this railroad was built by Black people or enslaved labor, or we might not realize there used to be a slave auction here. In the Delta, a lot of those things are, the vestiges of it are still there. They're too poor to build new things and rip it down. So I felt like it's not 2020 there. It's a lot of other years, but it's not there. And I felt like you're just passing through these different eras that are just kind of hanging there in the air. And so a lot of the work I'm interested in is kind of peeling that back and saying, what else happened in this place? What are the echoes of other things that exist here? Let's not erase these things. Let's proliferate these things. Let's tell these stories. Let's get these voices out there. And especially because a lot of African cultures and Caribbean culture is about things that are carried in the body. It's about communicating through dance, telling stories with our voices, with drum beats. You know, that's so much. I remember I read about this kind of this pastor who was a slave, and who, when he's talking, he doesn't actually have a Bible. He just uses his hands to preach. And that image of this enslaved priest, or pastor, sorry, I was raised Catholic, just out there using his hands, you know what I mean? And still being able to kind of conjure this and having this sort of fusion of what he knows, what his body knows, what his ancestors knows, the knowledge that he carries, the acts of resistance. Like, there's so much more there. um, the enslaved people aren't just victims.
That's beautiful. I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of being able to be honest about these things, and also how you process a lot of this stuff through your art, through writing, like what it brings you. But I also want to ask you about this that Sarah Jones video that you had pinned for us to also. But first, to that question I just asked.
How I process it.
Well, what does it bring to you? Like, what do you? Why is this important to to talk about these things and to be able to process them? And how is it that you feel being able to write about these things and tell stories that evoke these places and these people helps you or the readers?
Well, I mean, you and I. Well, you are still an actor. I'm just a failed actor now. But
don't say that.
I think. I think that early thing I talked about, being a kid and wanting to insert myself in those worlds, like getting to imagine myself into these spaces, getting to inhabit them, getting to travel to other worlds. That's what a lot of creativity is about, creating these spaces. But I think everything just becomes more complex and vibrant and beautiful when I realized, actually there was a Black inventor who came up with this verse, or actually there was this woman who, smuggled herself out, or this this enslaved person who hid himself in a box, and what I mean? You discover all of these different, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that box guy. Didn't Frederick Douglass hated that dude? Apparently. Did you ever heard about this, Mike?
I don't know anything about box guy.
This dude mailed himself to freedom in a box. I forget what his name is, but he did add the word box to his name. And he toured around telling the story of how he got to freedom through song and how he mailed himself through freedom with this box. It was a piece of entertainment, but I always read that Frederick Douglass was not a fan of this guy because of how he had turned this thing into entertainment. But that's just a little tangent that we can fact check some other day. But you were saying, Chanelle, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot what I was saying, but I think, I'm learning in more detail about the Haitian Revolution right now, and it is so complex and crazy. It's just, even some of the histories that we have of Black folks are kind of really condensed and simplified, and kind of erase like all these different groups and make everybody too much the same. You know what I mean? So I don't know, when I discover all these different stories, like, I love it. That's one of the things I love about being Black, the culture, the history. And the more I learn, the more complicated things get. Like right now, I've been doing research on, I'm doing research on the yellow fever epidemic in Memphis. But as I have to go back in history, I was reading about the 1866 Memphis race massacre, which previously is called a riot. But when you kind of deep down into that history, just all of a sudden things are kind of polyphonic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for me, even if it's a dark history, there's something that lifts me up. There's something sort of joyful in that. There's people aren't being silenced.
I have a quick question. So in your background, it sounds like it was sort of turbulent in some ways, in terms of not being the most stable family situation, not being in an environment that was like very validating on you and your cultural legacy. And what can stem from that a lot of times is a difficulty having confidence. And writing novels specifically, I feel like, and I'm never having written one, I feel like it takes a lot of confidence because it's such a long process that there's lots of opportunities for some self-doubt to arise and try to talk you into quitting or letting go of the idea at some point. And I would love to get some insight from you, how your confidence developed and how you remind yourself to push through that self-doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my self-doubt came from the way I look and just like being seen in the space. Like a lot of times I just wanted to be normal. I just want to be invisible. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's actually connected to just wanting to be free. Like sometimes I think I just want to tell white people, like, people just want to be free. They just want to move through a space freely. They just want to be allowed to inhabit and stretch out and breathe. And I think with writing, it's something that I was doing by myself in my room. And even though my life early on did have some turbulence, when I was really young, I had a young mother, and I was also partly raised by my Irish grandmother and my English great aunt. And my great aunt taught me how to read when I was 4. She was like a headmistress. And so we would make stories and make books together. So I think early on, I felt like this is something that's mine, something that I can do, something that nobody's going to do like me. And I also think I thought I was good for a long time when I wasn't. But it's just like when you really dig down and tap into what you're obsessed with, what you're curious about, and who you are, when you let those two things mix, nobody's going to do what you do. Nobody can be you. You are going to be slightly different. You're going to bring some, even if you're telling the same old, I don't know, Romeo and Juliet story, like no one's going to tell your version if you can tap into the things that make you you, that wake you up, that sort of amplify and lift you. And so I think part of it is, and Baron, you and I have talked about this a bunch, I think it's also about perception. Like being a better actor, being a better artist to me is also about like being able to see yourself more clearly, looking at the words you've written and trying to imagine not you and what you're trying to project there, but what is the experience like for the reader? You know, and the closer you can kind of let the ego and these other things kind of fall away, I think you get closer to that sort of direct communication that you're trying to have. Here, I have this beautiful, vivid dream. Let me put it into your head.
Thank you for that.
Very, very beautiful. And I also wanted to, you know, we'll finish up with this. You had mentioned this video that Sarah Jones had posted. Sarah Jones, who I believe is another person of, I'll say, blended identity. You know, she posted this video that really spoke to you. Can you summarize what that was and why it hit you?
Baron, can you summarize? So the video is about, I think, it's about a lot of things, but part of it is about her being this genius performer and feeling in some ways like she's a palatable enough Black person, but then spending all this time on these different projects and being told by white people like, nah, let's pair you with a white guy, or let's, you know, I think it's just like people saying to her, oh, you're amazing, but we just don't know what to do with you. You know, it's kind of like you and I would have the conversations where we talk about sometimes it feels like in certain areas, like maybe there can only be one great Black performer. You know what I mean? And there can't be different kinds of Blackness. Like they just have to fit into this neat box, you know? And so I think,
marketable, to be marketable.
Yeah. You know, whether that's like, you know, talking urban or whatever that is, you know what I mean? Whatever that kind of limiting view of Blackness is. And so I think for her, it's like this idea of, you know, we just don't know what to do with you. But also what she was saying is, even though her work has to do with race and, you know, she does all these different impressions and she creates all these characters, that she was kind of just waking up to what it had been like to be sort of deep in the water of racism and white supremacy for so long. And I think there's been a lot of talk about what white people think and the work they need to do and the realizing. But at the same time, I think a lot of Black folks are also kind of like waking up and realizing and thinking about all the things that they've had to compartmentalize and ignore. And I mean, I've had experiences where somebody else had to tell me that I was being discriminated against. Because I just don't necessarily walk through space like, I'm Black. Do people think I'm Black? You know what I mean? Like I'm not walking around thinking that. I'm just thinking my thoughts. And sometimes when I've had an interview or a job talk or a class, you know, I'm not necessarily thinking that an awkward interaction or something that happened with somebody is because I'm Black and I didn't act a certain way, you know? But then I've just been kind of like thinking about what she said, and, you know, other people have said, it's kind of like if you let all of those things hit you, you would just scream. So you can't deal with it all the time. But then I think there's also a kind of a realizing like, yeah, maybe I have been walking on an incline. And you and I were talking, Baron, and I said like, that's part of the reason I quit acting. Is because I was a good actor, but it wasn't exceptional like Amber Gray, you know. And so I just wasn't going to make the cut. I just wasn't going to be able to make it. Unlike, you know, a white guy where there's lots of roles for them. So you don't have to be that great. You don't have to be exceptional. You can be okay, and maybe you'll make it.
Right. You'll get a lot of chances to become better, you know, if that's in you. Well, Chanelle Benz, thank you very much for being here with us. The book is called The Gone Dead. Please buy it at a black bookstore. It is out there right now. She also has a book of short stories called, is it The Man Who Shot My Eye Out Is Dead? Is that what the name of the short stories is?
Yes.
Yes, off the top of the dome.
I just downloaded that one last night and started digging in, and it's really awesome so far, and I'm excited to read that and much more of your work. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, so when we come back, we're gonna have another very, very funny guest. How do I say it like that? We're gonna have a funny person. I was riveted by Chanelle. That's my good friend. So those are the kinds of conversations that we get to have over the phone. So I'm happy to be able to share her brilliance with people who did not see it before or have not seen it before. Yes. And I just wanted to say, she shouted out two people. Sarah Jones, we didn't really explain who she is. If you don't know who Sarah Jones is, she's a writer and a solo performer. She's been on Def Poetry Jam. She's had multiple Broadway runs of one person shows. And then also Chanelle mentioned Amber Gray, who is the Tony nominated actor that was in the musical Hadestown that was on Broadway. So yeah, that's a lot of info.
Incredible. And I felt like, I had a million questions I could have asked too. We certainly could have talked to her for hours. That was such a fantastic conversation.
Hey, we get to start the conversation. Everybody out there, please follow her on all of the different social networks. She's at Chanelle Benz. So anyway, we'll be back in just a bit with comedian and activist Demi Adejuyigbe.
Hey lovers. Are you feeling lonely? I'm feeling worse than lonely. Knowing that the top 1/10 of the 1% own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And I'm definitely the bottom. Economic reform. Call me. Let's talk about vast income inequality. After all, economic rights are human rights.
Wow. We're back at Call and Response. I'm Open Mike Eagle. This is Baron Vaughn, and we're joined by our good friend, Demi Adejuyigbe. Did I say that right?
Hello.
Did I get it?
You did. You nailed it.
You gave us a quick crash course during the break. Unfortunately and embarrassingly, we did need it. But
It's a hard name. There are silent letters. It's all over the map.
Yeah, but now we never have to worry about it again. We've been armed with knowledge, folks.
Map of Nigeria, and I know way too many Nigerians to mess with.
I'm actually from Ghana. No, I'm kidding.
Good God.
Baron he got 3 inches shorter.
I really did.
You know what's funny though? Chanelle is from England. I was also born in England.
Oh yeah, I did not know that.
Yeah, left when I was 4.
Oh really? Oh okay. And your parents came here from there, or did they just send you by yourself?
Yeah, I haven't seen them in a while. I gotta call them. Shit.
You're like, here's the ticket. And call us when you get to your 30s.
So you before coming here, right, and after being born in London, you spent a lot of time in Texas. Is that correct?
Yeah, grew up in Texas, in Dallas, specifically Plano. But yeah.
Oh, Plano. I know Plano. Do you know? No, never mind. I won't ask you.
No, I actually really want you to, because there's like, it never is the case, but I'm just like, one day someone's gonna be like, yeah, I know that person.
I'm trying to think. There's 2 people I know from Plano, and I'll come back to you about that at the end of this.
Yeah, don't dox them on a live.
Definitely not.
I mean, so you come via Texas, and you've been in LA quite a while now, right? Mm-hmm. Like a lot of the stuff that I want to talk to you about kind of centers on how you're a person I admire from afar. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, but through as bad as things can seem to be in the world, when I speak to you, when I look at what you put out into the world, there always seems to be a very kind of healthy and at least aiming to be selfless outlook and helpful outlook on the things that you do. Would you agree with that?
Well, thank you. I think I try to do that.
Right.
I think there was a period of time where I felt very overwhelmed by the cynicism that I see in comedy a lot, and especially like on Twitter. It feels like I don't know if it's an LA and New York thing, but it feels like there's a stronghold of comedy that cynicism like runs through, and I always feel like bad about it, and I feel like, my feelings are gonna get hurt if I take part in this, or it's like I'm on the other side of it, so I just always feel like I don't want to do anything that feels super mean-spirited. But at the same time, it's like there are times where I just feel like I feel hopeless, and I'll just like step back. Mm-hmm. But I do try my best to try and uplift things and like be active and just talk about things that I think need to be talked about.
In terms of place, and this is all kind of just a long form way to ask like one kind of simple question, but my experience of LA has been that it is difficult to feel like I am connected to a community here. I grew up in Chicago, where things felt, from my experience, a little bit more connected. And I'm wondering, has that been your experience here in LA? What is your sense of finding community here in this city?
It's definitely hard to do that. I've gotten pretty good at doing it in my neighborhood, because I like to go for walks, and like there's just a lot of stores and like regulars that I see around my neighborhood.
I used to see them.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I used to see Baron every so often when I walk to work. But it just feels like that helps me establish a sense of community, but it isn't always the same, because it's like I don't feel like when I'm interacting with these people, I'm like, oh, it's my friends, or it's these people that I see. It's like, okay, well, I'm walking to businesses that I go to every so often. I feel like I have a great sense of space, but it's hard to feel like I have any idea who the people I'm like regularly interacting with are, or feel like I know them past being like, yeah, I go to this painting place every so often, or like, oh, I go to this restaurant every so often and see this one waitress or whatever. But it's just like, yeah, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
That is a weird thing in LA. I mean, I my theory is it's because it's a driving culture, because LA County is a ridiculously huge place with like 88, 89 districts, half of which are their own cities. I didn't even know when I didn't have a car for a long time and I was going from every place in LA to another place. And I was like, why is there no centrality? Why are there 14 downtowns in this damn place?
It feels like 20 different people were given a little chunk of LA and told, all right, you can build whatever you want here. And then they forgot that they meet in different places.
Yes.
They just have like individual little shanty towns.
Well, it's actually not like that, Demi. It's exactly like that.
Right.
It is exactly that.
You know, just a quick note. There's this book, I don't know if either of you all are aware of it, called City of Quartz. And I forget the author's name.
With a Q or with a C?
With a Q, City of Quartz.
Okay.
And it literally tells the story of how all these individual villages developed here and why it feels like there's multiple downtowns. Because it's just multiple financial centers, and they kind of compete with each other for resources, which was one of the things that kind of makes this city very different from other cities.
Yeah, because the whole place is competing with the rest of it. You know,
Exactly.
That's also the feeling of LA in a lot of different ways. Took me a while to get that word. I'm sorry, Mike. I yield.
No worries, man. So Demi, one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to you is because of this brilliant painting that you displayed on your Instagram, and I believe that we're going to show it here on the screen here in a moment. And it is a building on fire with ACAB above it. And you looking very thoughty next to it with the paintbrush on the side of your mouth. I mean, can you tell us about that? I thought it was such a striking image. I wondered if you'd talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, totally. There's a photograph that was going around of, I believe it was believed to be the Minnesota Police Department, but maybe isn't, on fire on one of the early days of protests. And it was taken by this photographer, like Slate MK2 is his name. And when I saw it, I was like, it looks like a painting. Is it not a painting? And I looked closely at it. I was like, okay, I guess it's not. But I was like, I want it to be a painting. It feels like it'd be a perfect painting. And I started painting in quarantine. It's just a thing that I'm like, oh, I think it would be fun. I got like an acrylic set from some friends like a few Christmases ago, and it had never busted out. So I was like, oh, let's try painting. And I was just sort of like, well, I have large canvases. I want to see if I can paint this. And I spent a few days on it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna put ACAB in the flames just because it feels like a time to make protests start. And it feels like I had pulled away from the internet after like the second month of quarantine, just being like, it's not good. I don't need this in my life right now. And then when this was all going down, I sort of felt like I still don't want to be involved with the internet, but I also don't want to be like I don't think I leave any room for people to think, oh, does he maybe support the police? I feel like I'm very outspoken about how much I don't care for them, but I just felt like I wanted to like put something out there just to be like, I'm alive, and I also think that what's going on sucks. And I was like, well, I'm gonna just put this out and then allow myself to step back at the same time. But it just felt like cathartic for me to work on something that felt like a strong statement. But yeah.
What has a response been? I mean, I imagine when you do make a grand gesture like that, that does kind of lay your politics bare. It can create difficulty with engaging in social media because there's people who are going to come after you to try to say things to get under your skin. When you make that sort of statement. So how is it? Have you had to deal with that, and how has it been?
I haven't had to deal with that too much. I think there was like one person who said something that is like, so like, it was just like, oh, okay, the cops are gone, and how are you going to stop murderers? And I was just like, all right, this is in bad faith, and I don't think you understand this at all. But then it was like the only other responses I got that were even like vaguely confrontational were just like old classmates being like, oh, this painting is so good. I don't know, like I have police officers in my family, so I don't know about the sentiment, but it's really good. And I was like, that's exactly the kind of thing that I was like, I fully get that, and I'm not trying to convince you otherwise, because I don't think it's a thing that I can do, but I also am. It's like, I think that being so open with my politics has sort of weeded out the people that would have been mad at me. And outside of that, it's like, who's going to discover it and then go like, it's time to fight with this guy who's not really engaging with people about this art anyway. So,
Yeah, that's happening on some of Funny or Die's networks right now.
Yeah, right
People are
this
like,
second.
Why is everyone black over here?
they're gonna DM me and just be like, I don't care for your art and I'd like to fight, and I'll be like, I'm not responding to it.
Yeah, well, I had a question because you're huge on the internet. You've got a kind of a huge following. You've made quite a name for yourself. And I look at you as a very self-made person. Like everything that as far as I understand, everything that you have was kind of earned, and earned by you creating
I'm Jeff
content.
Bezos' son.
Oh,
Yeah,
I can see the
I don't
resemblance.
talk about it.
It's very strong.
Yeah,
Same
I wear the
hair.
jackets a lot. This is a wig.
Oh, okay. Well, that I didn't know that. No, but I guess I'm just saying that, like, you've got such a huge internet presence. When you say that you need to step back, what does that mean for you?
I think that I get very stressed out by this sort of engagement that comes with being like having an audience on the internet, and where it feels like I think I'm a very like, I do things that seem like I love attention and performing, but it's really just because I think I think I have a brain that I'm like, every time I have an idea, I'm like, let's do it. But at the same time, I do a lot of things that I'm just like, this isn't really for anyone. It's just because I did it. But since I did it, let's put it out there. And when I do that online, it means that people engage with me in a lot of ways that I'm just like, this is stressful and I don't really want this engagement. So I think I sometimes need to step back and just go like, do these things just for me, to make sure that I'm like, it's just for me and not something I'm doing because I'm falling into this trap of being like, oh, I want attention, because it stresses me out and exhausts me. So I think that stepping back is always good for me to just sort of get my bearings and like focus on the things that I care about more than falling into the trap of just being like, oh, I guess I'm gonna keep doing this one thing that people really like from me because they tell me that they're excited for it, and I'm like, but I don't like it. So yeah,
I think that there's a really important potential lesson for people in hearing something like that. So I'm gonna tease a little bit of that out, even though it might feel kind of obvious to us. But there's some things you're saying that I think are really important tools when it comes to how to maintain your sense of self and your values when having to deal with the internet and social media specifically. So one thing you just said a moment ago was that you were talking about somebody responding to your painting and you decided in yourself that you weren't going to deal with it because it was in bad faith. And that's something I feel like I kind of do too. I kind of evaluate whether somebody's legitimately trying to engage in discourse or whether it feels like just a troll. But I did want to hear you talk about that more, so we can kind of maybe give some insight into others on how to protect their minds and be on the internet at the same time.
Totally. I think that there's a lot of times when people will engage in bad faith just to sort of like goad you into an argument just for the sake of either trying to get you to slip up and say something that you can't really justify, or just thinking that they absolutely are like have a foolproof argument that you can't really back out of. And whenever that is the case, I have one of two options, which is just ignore it and don't let them win and block them, because I love the block button. I
love it too.
I have preemptively blocked like so many politicians, just being like, I don't want you guys retweeting Ted Cruz into my timeline. Sorry, he's gone.
Right.
But then the other thing is like, sometimes I will just go like, I don't want to take this seriously, but I do want to tell this person off. So I'll just like say something stupid to them and be like, well, this is all I'm engaging, because I know that as soon as I get into a serious argument about it, it's just going to be like, if I back out at any point, then to them, they'll be like, oh, they just stopped responding because I've won. And it's like, no, I stopped responding because I don't want to do this for the next hour looking like an idiot on the internet. And like, I'm getting actually mad about this person I've never seen, who is just like, we're just two people sitting behind a computer yelling at each other. And it's like, neither of us is going to change our mind. This isn't in good faith. It's people arguing to go, no, I'm right. No, I'm right. And it's like, then what's the point of doing this besides just letting your blood boil and letting this person think that they are getting at someone that they consider to be like, have a larger audience, and just like, they're trying to discredit you. They want a thing that they can like look back on whenever you say anything and go, oh, well, you aren't actually as smart as you think you are because of this other moment. And I just feel like it's never worth the fight. It's never like, I don't think I ever say anything that I don't feel a little confident about or very confident about, because I don't want to, like, I don't want to stand behind something that I have to fight for and be like, well, I can't justify this, but here's this. So it's just always like, yeah, I think it's very easy to tell when someone's arguing in bad faith too, because they'll either say something like, honest question, just trying to ask, and it's like you can tell that they are using certain language where it's like, no, you are asserting a thing that you think is true already and trying to get me to explain it to you so you can fight. Or they'll just couch it in like it's all about like the language they use and how they suggest that certain things are objectively correct, or certain things are like they're playing dumb in a way that they want you to try and correct them so that they can lead you on this wild goose chase. And I'm always just like, I don't want to play this game, so I'm not gonna.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic piece of advice. It's kind of like I look at it like it's an infinite game. I had a scientist say that to me, or actually I saw him speak. He had written this book, and it's a controversial book, and people were like, well, he had went to other people's theories and debunked some, and he ran all of his stuff by those actual scientists, like the ones that were alive, right? But of course there's going to be people who debunk his book, and he has a lot of critics, and he's never really responded. And when I saw him speak, somebody was like, well, why don't you ever respond? And he said, because science is an infinite game. It's like there's always going to be new and better information. This is what I think right now based on the information we have. I hope someone disproves me, because that would mean that we've had more information, but it's a waste of energy to constantly be in a fight about the work, you know what I mean, that and about the stuff that you're putting out, because it's going to change.
So like it's so malleable, but it's also so open to interpretation in different ways, where it's like you can have a direct thing of someone saying like the sky is blue, and you can have one person going like, okay, well, that means that all of these things it reflects on are blue. It's like, well, no, because what does it mean to reflect on? It's like other people will interpret one source of information as multiple different things, and then that leads to different political beliefs and all these other things, and it feels like you're trying to fight someone on whether or not something is a spoon or not, and you're like, you just both have a different definition of what a spoon is, and it's like, then why are we doing this? And it's like, all right, someone will prove what a spoon is, and it's like, well, now we're arguing about what utensils are, and it's just like it's so hard to do, and it feels like it's the infinite game.
Earlier, you also said that you're the kind of person who feels like whenever you get an idea, you have to try to execute it, and in that, you're a writer, a painter, dance, make short films. I'm curious if there's anything that you've thought about doing, but you've actually found yourself too intimidated to actually try to go through with it.
I mean, the big thing for me is everything that you've listed as me doing is like it feels like a distraction from like just writing and directing films, and that's just the thing where I'm like, it requires so much collaboration that I'm scared of it, but I'm always just like, someone just give me $1 million and let me go. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. But it does feel like everything that I do is just me going, here's something that I can do on my own, so let's do it. And everything else outside of that feels hard, because there's a lot of collaboration that I am worried about going wrong, or that I'm like, oh, but if I lose control of this, and then it's like my name on this thing, and then I look bad, and it's like all these things that I just need to get over and like do. But it's a lot of stuff that I feel like is hard to shed. I feel like I have a very like strong sense of shame around like just certain collaborations in my past that have gone wrong, and I like live with those so strongly that I'm just like, I can't deal with any more shame in my life, so I just won't do anything that potentially has shame attached to it. Which is another reason I try to like, I think cynicism is like poison for me, because just like there's so many people I admire who are very openly cynical, and it like kills me to jump in on it, because then I'm like, well, I just imagine them being that way about me when I'm not around, or like other people being like that and being like, oh, I want to admire them, but they think I'm corny or something. So it just like, it's this like feeling that I am like, if I can just pull away from it and not engage with it so strongly, then it doesn't matter. And I don't have to think about that as like a concern or a like prerequisite to how I make stuff.
Go ahead, Mike.
One thing you just said that really resonated with me was about being intimidated by filmmaking and writing because it's so collaborative. I had my first genuine experience making television with Baron, and and Comedy Central last year for the New Negroes. And you know, as exciting, as thrilling as it was to come together and produce that sort of product that we really like stand behind and poured our hearts into, I found that it made me run and go do some music, because I can control music, because I don't have to talk to anybody about each individual choice, because it's not a thing that has to be negotiated with me and other people. So I don't know, that it just really resonated with me that you said that, and I wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, I do think that like in having specific control over something that's already like in motion, I always feel way more like whenever I'm in a writer's room, and like I love the collaboration aspect, and then I love getting to go off and just do my thing, because I'm just like, it's so fun to collaborate with people, and it feels great when the wheels are in motion. But then getting the moment where you just get to go back to being like, oh, this is how I often work, and this is how I get a chance to just sort of be like, I'm making something, and I hope you guys like it. I think you'll like it because I really like it. Just getting back to that moment where you're like, here's my contribution, here's me. I would like, I'm proud of it. I want you guys to see it. It feels so good, and that's why it's like I'm always like, if I'm collaborating, I need someone else to kickstart it in a way that I can just jump on and then go like, cool, now it's me time.
Fascinating. I mean, it's the same for me in stand up as well. Like being able to have stand up is the control freak's domain. It's we are the writer and the director and the actor and the wardrobe stylist and all those things. So it's like it's a very different muscle than collaboration. Collaboration brings a different part of you forward, but stand up, or at least your, if you will, individual, unique art, the way that you express yourself, where it's only about, I have this idea and I got to get it out there, and it takes as much time as it takes, like there's no deadline really, as much as that you just want to do it because it brings you joy,
But it's also the shame freak's nightmare, because it's just getting up there and being like, if you guys don't respond to each of these jokes the way that I need you to, I'm going to hate it. I'm going to go home and just go like, well, I can't do this ever again.
That is very true. But the thing about it, the key is that you always have to come back. You always have to face that shame. Have you ever heard what's it called? Exposure therapy? You ever heard of that,
Yeah.
Demi? So it's that same thing, little by little, you keep going back to that thing, because nobody wants to bomb. That's the biggest thing that anybody who ever wanted to try stand up, is scared of. But nothing teaches you more than bombing, because you never want to do that again. It makes you go back to the drawing board. It makes you rewrite. It can put a fire, in your heart if you let it. So I guess that's all I'm trying to say is, put a little fire in your heart. That's all I'm trying to say.
That's pretty good. Put a little fire in your heart. So if we're talking about creativity, we're talking about selflessness in a sense, and community, then I think we have to deal a little bit with the society that we live in and how it has a tendency to like try to bolster the ego. I feel like part of the world we live in is constantly trying to goad us into being rugged individualists and to not care about the community. Demi, I'm wondering from you, is there any like philosophical, spiritual, or psychological, any kind of practice that you have to kind of ward off society attempting to point us back towards the ego when in your work there seems to be a higher aim?
I think that's hard. I think that it's hard to have that sort of a compass around things, just because so much of my work is just in league with the internet, which feels like its own sort of spiritual thing, and it has its own rules, and it's all like I'm always just trying to figure out how to work without any sort of like limitation or like consideration for how people are going to respond to it. So I think that's another thing that pulling back is good for me because it just feels like you embrace with your audience, and you sort of figure out what works and what doesn't work and what people want from you, and then it's like, okay, well, now you're creating around these expectations. And so pulling back and just having no idea what people want or what people are expecting or like care about feels so useful, and it feels like it's sort of a ritual in its own sense, where it's like you can't create art for art's sake if you are creating something specifically with the express. I mean, you can. I think it's like commission work at that point, though. But like just trying to create something for a specific audience in the hopes that they like it, as opposed to creating something and like just trying to express a feeling or express an idea or even just like sort of express a belief. It feels so devoid of an audience. It feels like it's just got to be you. It's got to be about pulling back and like getting sense of what you care about and trying to express that in the purest form without any sort of like outer influence. But it's also, I think it's so hard to know, like at a certain point when it's like, it kind of feels like leaving a cult, and it's like, okay, well, I know that I am in this cult and I have this idea of what the cult has taught me. But even after you've left the cult, it's like, you spend so much time in this cult. How do you know what's you and what is cult? How do you know what is like influences from your surroundings? And how do you know what is like your true desires and beliefs and all these things that you actually want to do? And I feel like that's something that's hard to take stock of for me, because it's always like, I think a lot of my education in activism and even just like political and social beliefs comes from the people I surround myself with and like the people that I read and the people whose work I engage with. So it's like pulling back from that can be hard, because it's just me going like, okay, well, what do I believe when I'm not letting other people tell me what to believe? But I also think it's necessary, because it's a necessary balance between going like, I need to stay informed, but I also need to not let information be the only guidance for what I believe, and I need to let my surroundings and like my just like own life sort of guide my art and my beliefs, which is also complicated just because it's like, I think I'm fairly privileged compared to a lot of people. And so if I were to just be like, what do my own surroundings and the way that I've lived sort of like mean, and how should I respond to the world according to that? It'd be like, okay, well, I'd probably have a little more right-leaning beliefs according to that. So it's also just about surrounding yourself with diverse voices and voices that aren't necessarily who you are, and like surrounding yourself with people who are actively trying to help communities that are underserved, and like getting to know what they need. So it's not just you going like, okay, well, what do only the people that I know directly care about? That's such an unhealthy way to live.
Yeah, I think it's on us to kind of be, expansive when we're picking the people in our lives, figuring out who we surround ourselves with. If you look around and everyone around you is pretty much the same, you done fucked up. You need to be, variety is the spice of life, especially when it comes to, human beings that you want to be around, and that can educate you. It shows you that there's always value in having someone that has a fully different opinion and background than you, that can provide a perspective you had no idea of before, and vice versa. So Mike, did you want to ask another question? Can I ask a question?
Oh, go for it if you got one on deck, man.
Oh, I don't. I just wanted to see if the possibility of it was there.
Of course, but I mean, even in terms of what Baron just brought up, if it's about parsing out the difference between you and the culture that you're steeped in, that surrounds you, is there anywhere that you look for guidance or inspiration when it comes to understanding what the difference is between who you are as an individual and in how you fit in with the world around you?
That was exactly the question I was going to ask. So I'm so glad that you did
Wonder Twins.
I think that one thing that has been very helpful for me is like, and I know it's weird to say because I am a Black artist, but it's like following other Black artists is so helpful to me, because I grew up like surrounded by white people. I grew up like going to school with mostly white people, having mostly white friends. And I feel sometimes like that is a thing it's been hard for me to like not shed, because it's not like I'm like, boo white people, but it feels like a thing that I sort of like naturally look around and I'm like, oh, I'm just kind of surrounded by white people still. So it feels like I have to actively work to be like, all right, well, I want to know what other, like I want to like incubate myself with other Black artists, so it doesn't feel like I'm the lone Black friend in my circle, and like I can sort of like relate my own problems and like thoughts to people that are like me and have experiences like me. And I think that's always something that I feel like is very centering, and it's very just, it helps to talk to people outside of my circle who are a lot like me and just sort of check in and just go like, how are you feeling about things right now? Like, is it weird that I feel this way? And they're like, no, a lot of people feel that way. It's because of this and because of this. And like, I know there's a lot about trauma, but it feels so weird to have one response and like see everyone around me have a different response and just kind of feel like, am I doing the wrong thing? And then talk to other people and go like, no, it's because of this. So I think just like, yeah, just having like little pockets of friends who I can talk to about issues that I feel like maybe my closest friends can't relate to, or the people that I have always like been surrounded by growing up can't relate to.
Would you say AKA talking about black shit?
Exactly, talking about black shit. It's great. Like calling up black friends and just going like, yeah, are you getting a lot of texts from white people you don't ever talk to?
Oh my goodness.
I'm like, yeah, why? I don't need this. I don't have your number saved in my phone. Why are you doing this?
Wow, I don't think I've gotten a text from a number I don't recognize, at least.
Man, text DMs, it's out of control right now.
Yeah, I mean, with the DMs, it's like I kind of understand that because I also just like left the internet, so people were probably just like, are you okay? But I'm also just like, if I'm not okay, I wouldn't tell you. But
were there any of these, you had talked about following other black artists, or were there any people in specific that you wanted to kind of shout out or that particularly inspire you right now?
Yeah, I mean, my friend Ife Wadiwe is a great Nigerian comedian,
it's the homie.
Right? You guys know and love Ife. Yeah. My friend Io Debary is great.
Yes.
I have Lou Wilson. There's just a lot of people who I'm like, I've been so lucky to call them friends, and I just like, I admire them and have looked up to them, and just like getting to be like, no, these people fucking rule, and then also getting to be like, the shit's whack, right? Is also lovely. I don't know, I'm not super close with him, but I've always admired Zach Fox.
Zach's great.
Yeah, so good. But like, there's so many people.
Fantastic. What were you gonna say, Mike?
Well, I just wanted to thank Demi for being with us and tell him we appreciate him so much. Just one quick thing before we let you go. Me and you were at an event, I think a couple years ago now, and part of this event was a large scale karaoke moment that a couple hundred people were at. And this event draws a lot of eclectic people, eccentric people. And at one point, somebody had signed a list and got up on stage and sang a song that was not the most immediately appealing song to everyone in the room. And he himself was not the most adept singer that there is in the world either. And people had been having drinks and partying. So as this went on, slowly but surely, a lot of people started kind of looking around at each other and kind of reacting negatively and criticizing this guy who was singing. And at one point, I started to feel that as well. Like, why is this guy doing this? And I was standing next to you at the time, and I turned to you and asked you, why is this guy doing this? And you were just like, he's just doing his thing, man. And it was like, that moment was so like impactful on me. and is one of the reasons why I wanted to definitely talk to you here on this subject, because that capability of being yourself and remembering your values, even when the whole room is kind of on something else, is something I admire to no end. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That was a fun night.
It was a great night. It was a great night.
Well, Demi, thank you so much for being with us. Demi Adejuyigbe, who is a writer on The Good Place, may it rest in place. You also wrote in The Late Late Show. Obviously, he's got a lot of content out there, videos, films, songs, obviously visual art like this. You are a Renaissance man. Nay, a Harlem Renaissance man.
Hello.
So, thank you very much for being here. And That's Demi, everybody.
Thank you,
Give
Demi.
him a round of a silence, since we can't hear the audience in any sort of way. Well, geez, Mike, we did it. That was
We
the show.
did it. We did. We did two now.
We did two down,
Wow.
84 to go.
Yes, that's the contract I signed. I don't know about you. Mine says 86.
Exactly, and we did two, so there you go. Because there are 86 in us. I don't even know what that means. Well, anyway, we also wanted to talk about a website that is fantastic if you are a Black person out there who is looking to find a therapist or, you know, some sort of mental health professional. There's a website called melaninandmentalhealth.com that can help you find therapists and mental health professionals of color. So heck, call and response. Thanks again to Funny or Die and Blavity.
Absolutely.
Doing their thing and helping us out. So I don't know, any closing thoughts, Mike?
I just wanted to say thank you, and we appreciate you to Chanelle Benz and Demi Adejuyigbe for sharing their thoughts on these sensitive subjects and giving us some insight from their brilliant minds. Thank you guys a lot.
Mm-hmm. And that's it for us. And remember, if you're thinking about trauma, there's going to be drama.
That's true. That's what happens every time.
We still on?
Looks like it.